welcome to Keys of the Kingdom. I'm Brother Gregory, and we're going to talk about the Kingdom of God. And that's a big topic because there's so much in the Kingdom of God. The Kingdom of God is not necessarily the universe itself. The universe is ruled by God. God has set it into motion. Whatever God is, you want to define it down into, some people call him Allah, some people call him Yahweh, Yadevah, and they have all kinds of different names. And then they have all kinds of different images of God, both carved images out of wood and stone, but also images of God carved in their own minds. And, of course, when they talk about graven images, they're talking about images that you make up out of your personal tree of knowledge as to what you think God is. And we're just not smart enough to know what God is, but we can define him down into general principles. God is truth. God is reality. God is the Creator. So we're defining them with these little terms, but we're not limiting them because our terms are not infinite. They don't cover every aspect of whatever God is, whatever this concept of God is. But people are always trying to put God into a box or into a bottle like a genie, where they fit him into an image that they create in their own mind. And whatever God is, God's probably more than that because we're pretty finite creatures. We just cannot grasp whatever God is all the way. But the kingdom of God is the right to be ruled by God, because when God set the universe into motion, he gave free will. Now, there's actually whole religious doctrines that people have created and a mishmash of doctrines, like we don't really have any free will, that we're somehow just a bunch of sock puppets that God created, and we're predestined. They take this predestiny phrase that you find in the Bible, and they create a whole doctrine in their minds that we don't have any choice. And I thought, what a simplistic way to take yourself off the hook. It's not your fault. You're predestined. You don't have any control. But that's not really the message you see throughout the Bible. So in order to hold on to that doctrine, and you find it amongst people who call themselves Calvinists, you find it amongst people who won't call themselves Calvinists, is that you're predestined, you don't have any control, you don't really make any choices, that God has already chosen, and you're predestined. And, the reason that doctrine, there's a couple of reasons why that doctrine is attractive to people, but it really often comes down to the fact that it's letting them off the hook. They're not making choices, they're predestined. They're not having any kind of a choice at all. And then there are the people who, you go to the other extreme. There is no God. That everything is choice, and I'm not controlled by anything, and I'm just me. But then they let themselves off the hook. Eventually, they want to let themselves off the hook of being responsible for who they are, because they're just, product of coincidences in chemistry. They've just evolved, like amoebas out of the primal slime, and they're just complex creatures. And but they're just the result of environment and heredity and all these things that have gone on before, and we've created ourselves out of nothing. And it's just all a system of random events. And so, in a sense, they have no choice either. They're just a victim of circumstances of the natural forces of creation that are just operating in the universe. That really doesn't hold much water either, but that's a very popular with a lot of people who want to call themselves atheists, non-believers in God. When you actually go back in history and start looking at mankind, I just was talking to somebody the other day. I really don't think there's much difference between prehistoric man and man today. We are fairly the same in the essence of our creation. Now obviously the environment of our society and the things that are going on is altering men to some degree, but the basic foundational concept of mankind really hasn't changed that much over the last 5,000 years or 6,000 years of when I talk about prehistory or prehistoric where, because there's large areas of the world where we have very little knowledge of the history there, and our history might go back only 100 or 200 years, maybe 1,000 years at the most. And so everything in that area, before what we know about that area, is prehistoric in that area. So we have prehistoric areas of the earth cultures, that go back just a few thousand years. So prehistoric is just, in the last anywhere between 2,000 to 5,000, 6,000 years. The fact that you know a little bit about Roman history, and there are people who actually challenge that we don't know anything about Roman history, that all that we know about history is just made up. I mean, there's no end to the delusion that people can fabricate for themselves once they start creating an image of the bold image of God or the world or history or science. But the reality is that, you can imagine you're flying after you're jumping off a building, but eventually the sidewalk may wake you up to reality. And so, what we want to engage in is the truth. We want to face reality. We want to face the truth and not be carried away by our delusion or by anybody else's delusion. So when I talk to you on these shows every week, I'm trying to share with you what I perceive. And I'm out in the desert most of the time. I deal with lots and lots of people from lots and lots of places around the world. I get calls from all over, and people want to tell me their image of the truth, the imagined perception of reality. And of course you can say, my perception of reality is also imagined by me. And maybe it is. And that's constantly the challenge. What am I seeing that is real? And what am I seeing that is just imaginary? I'm just filling in the blanks. It's like everybody has a certain amount of peripheral vision, just about everybody. There are some people who have lost peripheral vision. But supposedly, out there, if you run your finger out to the right of your eye and you're looking at it, there's a blind spot out there, and then it becomes visible again as you get a little bit farther out, because there's a little area of your eye that you don't actually see with. And so it's over there on the side, and when you're driving, that can be very dangerous because you don't actually see what's there. But your brain is filling in that gap based on what, it just saw as you were turning your head or you're flicking your eye around. It fills in that gap, so you don't really look out and see that blind spot. And we do that with our imagination about the reality around us and what we smell, taste, feel, or see. There's a lot of blank spots. There's a lot of things we don't see. There's a lot of things we don't sense or feel. And so we fill in those blank spots. And so when we look out in the world, we see, you can go into a room, you say, well, there's a chair there, and there's a couch there, and there's a table there. You kind of orient yourself, and then you close your eyes, and you try to walk through the room without hitting the table, the chair, and the couch, and follow this path, this maze through the furniture in a room. But you're basing your journey through that room on your memory of what you perceived was there. You're no longer receiving that information, but you've drawn a picture in your mind as to where everything is at. Recalling that picture, you navigate through the room. Well, that ability to draw that picture of what is in a given place at a given time, in a given moment, in relation relationship to you. That is really what imagination is. It is the ability to create a virtual reality in your mind based on the information that has come to you when you first walked into the room and looked and saw where everything is at. A blind person, you don't move the furniture around in a blind person's apartment. He's memorized where everything is at. He's gone around and through the senses that he does have, because he doesn't see, and he's felt, well, here's a chair, and over here's a table, and he memorizes where these things are, no longer sees them, but he walks around in the room. And some blind people can actually navigate with sound. As they move around, they can hear sounds changing, and they know they've come into another room, or they're closer to the wall, because the sound changes as you get closer to the wall. And they actually have deals now where they can have a little earphone in the ear of a blind person, and he has a little thing on his front of his clothes that is sending out a signal, and it bounces. The sound bounces back, and it's just a little ticking noise, and he can tell when he's coming to an object, or when he's facing, a wall or whatever, or there's somebody in front of him, because of the way in which the sound changes. Now, it's a little tricky to use, but some people have gotten pretty good at using it. But again, he's using other senses that he didn't have. He doesn't have sight, so he uses other senses. The white cane. Now that's using the sense of feel, because he touches, but it's also using that tapping noise that cane makes. Because he can tell. Is he walking on cement? Is he walking on grass? Is he going to be going on, clay? Like he's going off the road or whatever. And there, he feels objects out in front of him, and so that's telling him how he's navigating, because he's using the sense of feel and sound in order to navigate with the use of the white cane. So anyway, why all that analogy is because you look out in the world, you're using your sight, your ability to hear, your ability to feel, touch, smell, and you are getting information about the world, about history, about relationships with other people. You're reading their face, their expressions when you talk with them, when you come around them, and it's telling you all kinds of stuff, because you're reading not just what they say, but the way in which their demeanor and how they act, and that's telling you about that person. All this information coming in is forming an image of that person in your mind, what they look like. And people are sometimes very good at hiding the truth about what they really feel, who they really are. I mean, that's why there's a billion-dollar makeup business industry in the world today, is because people are disguising who they are with makeup. They're making themselves look different. They put on clothes, suits, they comb their hair, they put on eyeshadow, if hopefully we're talking about a woman, or lipstick, although why should I make such a sexist statement? It doesn't have to be a woman, but the reality is that people are creating an image of themselves so they look a certain way. And that's to present themselves differently than they are without all that stuff that they're adding in. And it's to help create an image in your mind as to who they are. And what they say, the way they say it. I mean, this is what politicians do all the time. They're projecting an image, trying to convince people, vote for me. And so that image that you see may not be real. And I always remember growing up that I saw John F. Kennedy running for office and as president and everything, and you wouldn't have known that he was a chain smoker of cigars. He would light the next cigar with the last cigar. He was constantly smoking cigars. Well, I never saw him with a cigar. How could a man who's out in the public, has camera people going around him all the time, and you don't even see it burning on his desk. You don't see some cigar smoke in the room. It's because for some reason the media just was treating him kindly. They liked that. It was popular in the media to do so. So when he was puffing on a cigar, they never took pictures. They just didn't do it. They when they were going to take pictures, they would remove the cigar from the picture so that you wouldn't see. They didn't Photoshop it out. They just took the time because they were a part of that image making, and they just chose to do that because he was popular with the press. And so it's a little dishonest, but they it didn't seem it was important, so they did it. But in reality, it's changing. They're fiddling with the image of John F. Kennedy, and it was the Kennedy-Nixon election where people realized how powerful TV was. The images that you presented on TV was powerful, and that's partly why the media treated him so well, as he was good on TV. He was good on that, and so that's what they were trying to make their news reports look good, and he looked good, so they did lots of news reports about him, and they airbrushed a reality around Kennedy that just didn't exist. Nothing to do with his politics, just to the image in your mind, because the image in your mind is going to either make you feel comfortable about Kennedy or not. And if you feel comfortable about him, you're likely to vote for him, because the American voter doesn't really sit and pore over the policies and record of the individuals to try to figure out who is really best equipped. They go by feeling. They go by, and this is how they pick their churches. They go by feeling. Did I feel good at that church? And to some degree, that feeling can be good, but what is controlling that feeling? What are the influences of that feeling? Go back to, women wearing makeup and certain kind of clothing and hairstyles and everything to look attractive, to look pleasing, to give you a feeling of comfort, and that creates popularity for them in your mind, in your attitude, in the way you treat them. Well, God's not going around putting on makeup. He's not trying to create an image of himself. God is who he is. I am what I am. But our perception of God is not usually based on sight and sound, because we don't actually see him or hear him. And, we don't hear his voice coming to us. But the reality is we do see and hear him in his creation, in what he has created. If God is the creator, if he is whatever thing put creation into motion, if that's him, then we can get a little bit of understanding of him by looking at nature. If we, as individuals, which the Bible says are created in his image, then looking at us can give us some insight into who God is and what God is. It's not going to give us a clear picture, because it's too big a picture for us to take in, but it will give us some sort of idea. And Jesus talks about that. How come you can read the signs in the sky, but you can't read the signs of the times? And if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. But then there were a lot of people that saw Jesus physically but did not understand Jesus, because they didn't really see Jesus. They saw an image of Jesus. They were literally projecting. And people do this about people you know, people you meet. You project into that person an identity based on what your eyes see. Like you see a nice girl who, I'm speaking about this from the point of view of a man, she seems nice, she seems clean, she seems neat in her, the way she presents herself, she has good manners. You think she's a nice girl because of all these things that you see. But you don't really see her heart. She could be a sneaky, wicked, conniving individual who's plotting your very death. You don't know. I mean, she's probably not, but or plotting somebody's death because you have a limited view of her. You have, you look for these things when you look at her, but you can't see into her soul. Now, they say the eyes are the window of the soul, but I don't know if people can really see into the eyes of the individual. And you go out and meet lots of people. I meet lots of people all the time. And over my life, I've met lots and lots of people. And so you get a certain feel for people, not just based on sight and sound and touch and interaction, but there's something else. There are other things you see with. Can you see with spiritual eyes into the heart and mind and soul of other people? The evil, Satan, all these other, the devil, all these other things that we create, or we draw from the text of the Scriptures, whatever they are almost always equated with the idea of deception. They can appear as an angel of light. They can appear as good things. And, of course, we see politicians out often trying to appear as one thing, and then we find out some scandalous story that they're actually something else completely different, that they're out there fighting for women's rights, and they actually beat their wife and cheat on their wife, or maybe you have a priest, and that's recently in the news, where priests are so holy and servants of God and servants of the people, and they've dedicated their life to God, and then you find out that they have child abuse, slave relationship with hundreds, maybe even thousands of people, and cover-ups and horrible abuses. But everybody thought they were such great guys. I mean, you had John Wayne Gacy was found with 23 bodies of children buried underneath his house. And everybody thought he was such a great kid. He would play clowns at parties, and he would go out and do charitable work, and meet with the president's wife, and she thought he was a wonderful guy, and all this stuff. And he was heinously murdering people, children, capturing them, torturing them, and then after they were dead, he buried them underneath his house. And those are just the ones that he buried under the house. There's a belief that there were many, many more that he dumped into rivers and out into landfills and everything. And he was just the most heinous of murderers. But people saw him every day, and they thought he was a great guy. They had no idea who they were looking at. Yet there he was. So are we deceived about people, about religion, about the Holy Scriptures, about life in general? We certainly can be. So how do we know when we're not being?
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
So we were talking about deception, seeing things as they really are. So what is the one thing we should start on taking a look at that we might have a ghost of a chance of seeing clearly, seeing without deception? And I think in itself, that one thing is not enough. That you have to go out in the world and challenge your vision of what you're looking at. But the one thing that you can look at probably closer than anything else is you. You know, you look out at other people and you kind of judge their motivations and what are they really up to. Are they a cigar-smoking, manipulative, womanizing politician? Or are they really a great guy? So you look at what you can see and try to figure that out. But you can't see everything. You can't be with them all the time. I was just talking to people about homeschooling. They come from a country where homeschooling is illegal. If you don't homeschool, if you try to homeschool your children, you will go to jail. In the same country, if you don't get the people's social number, whatever it is, social security number in that country, if you don't get one for your child, you will be arrested. It's a criminal offense to not get your children numbered. So, they have different perspective on things. They come from another reality. Their country is different than our country. So when you go out and you see how other people are dealing with the things of life in these other countries, you can make a contrast with your own. And you may say, well, we're a freer country because we don't do this, and this. But when you're looking at yourself, how closely are you really looking at yourself? How honest are you and you really look at yourself? And, of course, if we go back to the Scriptures and we look at the Scriptures, the dishonesty, when we look at ourselves, what we do, what we think, the way we think, the dishonesty of our perception of us as an individual is where all the trouble started. Adam was given a whole universe of, a world, a garden to live in. He had dominion over all kinds of things, but he was restricted. There was some instruction. One of my trick questions is, what was the first commandment of God? And people, I am the Lord thy God. But the actual first commandment that we have from God is dress it and keep it. Here's the garden, here's the planet, dress it and keep it. Take care of it and keep it so that you keep your dominion. Don't give your dominion away to somebody else to make this responsibility that I give you null and void. I am giving you something that you are to be responsive. That's a job. Dress it and keep it. And so that's the first commandment of God. Then he said, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but eat of the tree of life. So there's at least two trees. I assume there's lots of other trees, but those two trees, which are actually metaphors representing something. I can go into that. We have, but just for this conversation, those two trees, one is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The other one is the tree of life. You're not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You're to eat of the tree of life. And of course, one of the ways to perceive the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is your brain. Your conscious brain, the mechanical brain that draws that picture of the room with your eyes, and then with that imaginary picture in your head, you can close your eyes and navigate around the room. You're doing that with your brain. What you remember, what you're taught in school, you memorize it. You remember, this in history, and this in chemistry, and this in trigonometry. And with that information you memorize, you can use that information as a tool to go out and solve problems. But that's your brain doing that. That's the tree of knowledge. And it's there. You can use it, but not as a source, not to eat, not to guide you. You need something else, this tree of life. And so what's the tree of life? Life is, the word we see there for life is the same word for breath. It's almost, if you're breathing, you're conscious. When you stop breathing, you're going to be unconscious. So breath and consciousness are connected, but you have this tree of life that you're supposed to eat from. So your consciousness is not supposed to be entirely dependent upon knowledge, information, your senses. It's supposed to be also tapping into this tree of life, this tree of consciousness, this tree of awareness, this tree that cometh of God, and that is also a source of information, because it helps you decipher the information. When you receive information, you can say, well, this is valuable to know. You can say, this is not valuable to know. And so you categorize your information, and you're empowering information. This is really important. This is not really important. And this is what we see today on the social media networks when they talk about politics. You have, if to some people, if Trump says it, or it comes out of or they think Trump says it, it's bad. And there's been all kinds of guys that go out and talk to people on the street, and they say, well, what do you think of Trump's policy? And then they tell them, and they're actually naming off Obama's policies. They're not naming off Trump's policies. And they think, oh, that's terrible, that's terrible, that's terrible. Then they can go out to the same kind of people, and they can say, well, what do you think of Obama's policy? And they're actually telling them Trump's policies, or what he says. And they say, well, I think that makes sense, and that's really good. And because they've already decided that they're comfortable with Obama, this is back in the election, and they're not comfortable with Trump. Well, they decided they're not comfortable with Trump based on what they've received, the information they've received about Trump, what they saw, what they hear, or what they were told about Trump, which is usually the case. And I talking to people who are looking at European media all the time, they have an impression of Trump based on what they are getting in the news. They never see him. They never walk with him. They never talk with him. I actually have a neighbor who's has relatives that have been working for Trump in his private capacity in his home for years, and they think he's great. They think he's the most polite guy, most considerate employer. They just have nothing but praise for him. Of course, they're looking at them from the point of the fact that I want this job, but they seem that the picture that you get from what they say about them and what CNN says about them are completely different images. They're completely different. And I'm not defending or I don't want to be defending the President of the United States. I'm just using that as an example so that you can take a look. I'm sure we could talk about your family and find people that have an image in your family based on somebody in your family who doesn't like them. And then you may have an image in your family of somebody who thinks he was really great because he's always been fair with them. But I don't know your family. This is somebody who's out there in the public eye, and a lot of people see him and see things about him. But the reality is that we draw this image based on the information or whether the information is true or not. And we accept the information because we put value on it as it comes in. If you trust everything that CNN says, then what CNN says is the truth, and then you create your image based on that. If you trust what Fox News says, then your image of the truth that you create in your mind will be based on Fox News. And you will have whole sections of the population, one following CNN, I'm just using them as an example, and the other one following Fox, because they've already decided they have a preconceived notion that they're getting the truth from this news source and not getting it from that source. So the outcome of the facts that they receive, or what is posing as facts that they receive, will be based on their preconceived notion. They will have predestined their determination as to what is true and what is false, and what is good and what is evil. And so if they've accepted this source of knowledge, this tree of the media, this, whether it's CNN or ABC or NBC, or they've accepted Fox or NPR or whatever they're accepting as a source of information, that will predetermine the outcome of their perception of reality, the image of reality that they create in their own mind. So anyway, let's go back to that one thing that you can take a look at without looking at it through the eyes of the media, is you can look at you. You can look at your own deal. And when Adam was in the garden, he said that when he was confronted with the fact that he had eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, tried to decide for himself what was right, what was wrong, what was true, what was false. He just started putting value on information as if this was more valuable or that was more valuable, as a personal choice based on his intellect. That was eating of the tree of knowledge. And that awakened him to the fact that he doesn't know everything. He's naked. The word naked has to do with authority. Even the word serpent is connected with the word naked. And being naked is without dominion. And you have dominion, but you have to eat of the tree of life to have that dominion. You can't just imagine, the old comedy routine where, mind over matter, and you just have to think through the board. It was Bill Cosby. You think through the board, and then you can break the board, and you're learning karate. And then he tells, in his comedy routine that suddenly the board was thinking, no, you're not going to break me. And so then he shattered his hand and his arm and all this stuff. It's a funny routine, but the reality is the board doesn't think. But when you go out there in the world and you deal with other people, you can imagine that somebody loves you or somebody cares about you, but they may not. Because they may present the idea that they care about you, but they may be trying to take you for everything you've got. They may be trying to con you. And I've seen recently, or fairly recently, somebody who's gotten mixed up with somebody who I know is a natural con. He's addicted to conning people. And deception is just a part of his personality. he doesn't even decide to deceive people anymore because he's so self-deceived. He just walks around in that deception, and that's not that rare. Almost everybody is subject to such a thing to one degree or another. But he's betrayed individual after individual. He betrays himself, and he just is a walking case of disaster. And I hope he overcomes that someday. But he has to take a look at himself to overcome that. If you want your faults, your weaknesses, your character flaws to go away, you have to look at them. You have to admit them. You have to admit that you have a problem, that you have shortcomings, that you have failings. And then you can deal with them, and you can get better. And you don't have to be swept away by these compulsions that are in you. You know, most people who are, I hate to say that, end up thinking that they're homosexual, have been traumatized sexually, sometimes by another homosexual, or sometimes by just abusive parents or friends that are not really all that friendly. Maybe they were abused by somebody else, but I mean, this is where you see people like Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Casey and stuff like that. If you go back in their life, you find trauma in there where they were somehow abused, and then they go back and they abuse others. You know, somebody blows their top at you and gets angry with you, and then you blow your top at somebody else. It's like you have to pass it on. And the reason you have this compulsion to pass on this, trauma to somebody else and traumatize another kid like you were traumatized, and you're just drawn to it. You can't, like Jeffrey Dahmer would feel guilty after he killed somebody, but then he would go back and do it again. You know, he would feel bad. He would feel remorse. But see, feeling remorse and feeling bad is not what will cure you. It's not what will fix the problem. It's about forgiveness. This is why forgiveness is mentioned so much, because that can break the chains which bind you to return to that action. I'm sure a lot of you, maybe you may have a problem with eating. You may have a problem with pornography. You may have a problem with anger issues where you get real angry and even violent. Maybe you're a wife beater. Maybe you beat your kids. And the stories are rampant in our history as mankind of abuse of others. And it's usually because somewhere back we were abused. But it wasn't just, we're not automatically victimized by that abuse. But if we don't forgive, forgive everybody connected with that abuse. If your father beats you and your mother lets him, then you're going to hate your mother. You'll hate your father, but you also hate your mother because she didn't do anything to protect you. If your wicked stepmother abused you and your father didn't do anything about it, then you'll hate your father. I remember a family back east. Everybody they never understood their father. They walked on pins and needles around. They thought they respected him, but it was all because they didn't. Because their stepmother was abusive, or at least emotionally abusive, and so it created a rift between them and their father. They didn't know who their father was because they could not forgive their stepmother. So going back to Adam ate of the tree of knowledge, tried to evaluate the truth himself to decide what was good and evil, what was right and wrong. He was not supposed to do this. This opened the eyes to the fact that he is weak and naked and without power to make such decisions himself. He is not God. And that he should have continued to eat of the tree of life. But he didn't. But he didn't want to admit that he did wrong. So when God confronts him, he says, "The woman you gave me of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil to eat." He didn't say, "I did wrong." I shouldn't have done that. I've betrayed you. I'm sorry. I regret it. Forgive me. I am a terrible, ungrateful creation, and I am in need of your mercy and pity and forgiveness. He didn't say that. He says, the woman you gave me tempted me. He didn't take responsibility. And so right there you saw he not only had trauma, he wasn't willing to admit the truth about himself, so therefore he couldn't really forgive the person that he needed to forgive, because he wouldn't admit that the person that betrayed him was him. He wanted to blame it on the woman and blame it on the God who gave him the woman. That's what you do all the time. So, just in the last week, I've seen it time and time again. People they look out in the world and they see their present circumstances, and they admit that we don't live in a free country. We're freer than the country that arrests you if you don't get a number for your kids. We're freer than the country that arrests you, at least in the sense of home education, if you get arrested if you try to homeschool your kids. So we're freer in that aspect. In other aspects, we're not freer, probably. But the reality is that if you don't want to admit that you're not free, I mean, if you have to work and give up, if you're working for nothing, if you have to work for nothing, you have to labor for nothing. You get nothing back for your labor. You're a slave. A lot of people don't realize that during slavery in America, many slaves were paid. They just weren't paid full amount for their labor. And they couldn't necessarily negotiate what they were paid. They were forced to work, and they did not receive pay. They received, room and board, lodging. They received medical care. I mean, nobody who had a slave wanted to see the slave die unless he was just foolish, because that slave was of value to him. And they wanted to keep the slave a happy worker is a better worker. So and a lot of the slaves wouldn't leave when people came and set them free, because they liked their lot. They were well taken care of. They were well fed. They had a decent housing. They weren't beat. They were, most slaves weren't on these big laborious plantations. They lived with the family, ate with the family. When they got sick, the family brought them broth. They were a part of the family. That's what most slavery was. But it still was slavery. They didn't own their labor entirely. They were compensated, but maybe they weren't compensated entirely, because they did not own their labor. Their labor belonged to somebody else. If you have to work and part of your paycheck is gone when they give you your paycheck, somebody has taken it out before you get your paycheck, then you're a slave. For at least part of the day, you're a slave. And so, since that's the case in almost every country in the world, that if you have a number in that country, I mentioned Santo Domingo as an example, they have a cedula number, that's what they call it, cedula. If you have that number, a portion of your wages is taken out and goes to the government. If you don't have a cedula number and you're working for somebody, you get to keep all of your wages. You might not be paid as much because you don't have any protections of the government, but you get to keep it all. There's no way to take it out, because if they take money out of your wages, at least to send to the government, they have to have a number attached to you, and that's the cedula number. So, but generally speaking, most everybody in Santo Domingo has a cedula. And that's also how you get into schools, that's how you get benefits from the government, but you have to work without labor, because you're a slave. You're in a system of servitude where you have to work without labor. When you were in bondage in Egypt, 20% of your labor belonged to the Pharaoh. So you had to work for the Pharaoh 20% of the time. And so if you work today for McDonald's or for Rocketdyne or any major corporation or any company or small company, a portion of your labor goes out. You're a slave. For that time, you're working for nothing. It goes to the government. Now, the people don't like to talk about that, but that's just the case. I'm not saying anything bad or good about it. It's just the way it is. We're dealing with the reality. You want to know reality or not, you have to see that. Well, there's a lot more to reality than that makes you a slave. Because if you don't forgive others, you can be a slave to the emotions that have been planted in you by your trauma with others. And you will find yourself doing the same thing to other people that was done to you. And if you find yourself doing that, it's because you haven't forgiven somebody. So you remain attached to the spirit that they put into you when they traumatized you, and you will repeat that. So again, if Adam were to admit, this is why Jesus says, here's the publican, tax collector. His prayer is, have mercy on me, I'm a sinner. He's admitting his fault. He's admitting his error. And Jesus says he's going to enter the kingdom sooner than the Pharisee who is saying, I've done these good things. So now we have one of the philosophies or theologies or images of God we have now going around as a doctrine of Jesus Christ is that you are not saved by works, which is absolutely true. You're never saved by works. But works are evidence of what's going on. If you're like Jeffrey Dahmer going out and killing people, or if you're just losing your temper with your children, or you're abusing your wife, or instead of talking with her, you're calling her names, and yelling and screaming at her, or vice versa. She's yelling and screaming at you. Somewhere you're not dealing with reality. The reality of you. You're unable to forgive people. You're unable to forgive yourself if you're not willing to look at yourself. If you're not willing to look at yourself, you're not going to be able to see the world as it really is. Because it really wasn't so much that Adam's eyes were opened, because it was about a certain eye within E-Y-E, eye in Adam was closed. His physical eyes were open to something. His emotional eyes were open to something. His egotistical eyes were open to something. But his spiritual eye to the tree of life was closed. He lost access to the tree of life. And the tree of life is going to help you see reality as it really is. You're not going to be judging what is good and evil. You're going to know what is good and evil. That's why Jesus talks about let him who has eyes to see, and him who has ears, hear. Well, how do you get those eyes that see and those ears that hear? So the image of reality that you draw in your mind is reality. Because if you don't see clearly, you're not going to see reality clearly. You're not going to see the truth. You're not going to know the truth when you see it.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.